In this video, we're going to go ahead and put together the add contacts list. So it's pretty much this activity is going to be mainly a list view of contacts of potential users, which, yeah, it doesn't sound too exciting because we've done that a couple times already, but it will be a little interesting because we are going to use a custom search widget view in our toolbar in order to present the search query text alongside the exit button. So it'll be an interesting use case of creating custom views in our toolbar. So yeah, it's just gonna, for the, like most activities, we have three main components. We have our service layer first for the actual query that'll be happening. We have our layout, and then we have our activities. So we're gonna put stuff together in that order. So let's go ahead and start off with putting together our little service layer. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to open up my my services package, and I'm going to put this alongside the contacts service calls. So we have all of these different things that have to do with contacts, but in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the ability to search arbitrary users to this API service. So we need a method that accepts some sort of arbitrary string text and returns a list of users. Also, what's interesting is the return call is going to also return the query that was sent out in the first place, and we'll use that to compensate for potential ordering problems with the way the API calls might be processed. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to say public static class, and we will say, let's call this a search user. So I'm going to say search users request, and he's going to have a public string query and a constructor that accepts that parameter. And then we'll have a public static class search users response, and he will have a public list of user details users, as well as a public string query. So if you want to go ahead and pause the video, these are the two classes we need in order to express this particular operation in our asynchronous service layer. So now that we have that written, let's go ahead and jump down to our in-memory package and jump down to our in-memory contact service. And let's implement the method that'll handle this. So let's scroll down to the bottom here, and I'm going to say subscribe public void search users, and he will have contacts.search users request. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and instantiate the response. So I'll say contacts.search users response equals new search users response. And then I can go ahead and do response.users equals new array list of, well, I don't need to specify the generic type argument because it's inferred from the type on the left. And let's just go ahead and throw in some users. I'm going to go ahead, I'll do something interesting here. I'm going to go ahead and say for int I equals 0, I smaller than request dot query dot length I plus plus. Then I'm going to say response dot users dot add, and we'll say new create fake user. Oops, not new. What am I thinking? I was thinking like I'm instantiating something, so I'll put new, but no, I'm invoking that method. Sorry, just and then for the int ID we'll pass an I, and for isContact we'll pass in false. And then I'll go ahead and say post delayed response, and I kind of want this to be between 2 and 3 seconds to get, because we are going to be working a little bit on the interface of what it displays as the search is happening. So I want to give there some delay here to make it a little bit more real world. Anyway, so you'll notice that I add as many contacts to the response as the length of the query. And the reason I do that is I want every individual query to this method to be different depending on what the input was. You could do something like maybe change the name of each of the contacts based on the query, something like that. The reason I'm doing that is when I'm testing this code out in my activity, I want to know that when I type in a search query and perform the search operation, that the query was a new query that was processed, and I get returned different data so I can make sure everything's working. So this is kind of a testing sort of QA sort of thing to do here. Anyway, that pretty much wraps up all we need to do. Not a whole lot to that. So let's go ahead and jump into our layout next. Layout's going to be pretty simple. It's not going to be anything new here. It's all just going to be stuff you've already seen. So inside of our layout, we're going to jump down to activity add contact. And in activity add contact, we are basically going to create a list and a progress frame. So let's nuke this text view. I'm also going to change this from a linear layout to a relative layout. Of course, to do that really quickly, you just double click on the tab, type in capital RE and hit enter. And as of the newer version of Android Studio, the ending tag will autocomplete as well. Since we changed it from a linear layout to a relative layout, we can go ahead and remove this orientation attribute. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, inside of our relative layout, I do want to create a toolbar. So I'm going to say include, and I'm going to include layout, include toolbar, and that'll bring in our awesome toolbar up there. Then what I want to do is I want to create a list view, but for the list view, I want it to appear underneath the toolbar. So I'm going to give this toolbar guy an ID here. I'm going to go ahead and give him an ID of +ID/activity add contact toolbar. Then underneath the toolbar, I'm going to create a list view with a layout width and a layout height of match parent. And I'm going to say layout below contact toolbar. And then that's really all I really care about for this list view. Not a whole lot else left to do here. So let's move on to our progress frame. So I'm going to create a frame layout with a match parent width and height. And I'll give him an ID so we can show and hide him depending on what's going on. And I'll have an ID of activity add contact progress frame. I really should have put this in an include. I'm a terrible person. And we'll say clickable equals true. And we'll say, actually, you know what? I don't think I'm going to give him a background. Then inside of this, I'm going to give him progress bar of wrap content, and a layout gravity of center, and an indeterminate only to true. Okay, so that is our progress bar and our frame layout. So not too exciting there. That pretty much finishes up our layout. Like I said, there's not a whole lot in the layout. The cool stuff in this particular video is going to be how we're going to deal with the toolbar itself. So let's go ahead and move on to our, well, I guess I'll show the layout for a second for you guys to take a look at if you want to pause the video here. Let's move on to the add contact activity and actually put this guy together. So we're going to start off, I guess we'll go ahead and start off by stubbing out all the different methods so you guys kind of see where I'm going with this. And I also want to go ahead and stub out the private fields because there's going to be really interesting private fields here that needs to be explained. The first thing I'm going to do is say private user details adapter. Now, of course, we needed this adapter because we have a list view that's going to show user details. So that's why we need the user details adapter. And that's also why it's named that way. We'll do a private view progress frame so we can show and hide that. And I also, what's interesting here is I'm going to go ahead and say private handlers. So the reason I'm putting in this handler is because we are going to be doing stuff at a delay. So what's going to be cool here is when we type into our text view, our text box that's going to be in our toolbar, what I want to have happen is I don't want it to immediately send out that request. I mean, that would be a pretty inefficient thing to do, right? If you're sitting there and you're typing in somebody's name, and every time you hit a character, it sends out an API call, and that would be really inefficient, and it would cause a lot of congestion issues. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to have there be a delay. So you'll type out some stuff, and it's not going to immediately start searching until let's say a second after you finish typing. So the handler that we're going to be using is going to be used to do that. And if you don't remember what a handler is, it's basically an object that's going to be. It kind of allows us to schedule events to happen, or clear events from happening, or do things at every X seconds, stuff like that. So it's sort of this multi-threaded orchestrator of different things, and that's what we're going to be using it for. So the next thing we need is our widget. So I'm going to say private search view, and the search view is a class that it's going to be the view that's going to be added to our toolbar. So I said that we have the toolbar, we're going to be using a custom view. The thing we're going to be using is a search view, and that comes from us through the actual Android API here. And we're going to be using the support library one. So let's go ahead and select the support library one, hit enter, and I'm just going to call this search view. Now, the next thing we need is I'm going to say private string last query. So last query is going to be used to store the last query that was sent. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important in the case of ordering. Maybe the query that we sent, maybe we send a query, a search query, and let's say that request takes 5 seconds, but then a second later we send another query that only takes 2 seconds. Now you can imagine how this can be a problem. The latest query might return before an old query returns, and we need to know what was the last query that we sent. And the way I'm going to do this is the server is going to echo back the query for each response. And that's why inside of our response class, I have this query parameter. That's going to be sent back from the server. And we need our last... go away. Stop this madness. We need our last query stored in the activity to know when to disregard stale results, basically. Then I'm also going to say private user details selected user. Now that should be pretty obvious. When we select a user, we're going to pop up our progress frame, and then we're going to send out a request to add a friend request, and we'll need to store which user the user clicked on. The last thing we're going to need is a private runnable. I'm going to call this a search runnable. I'm going to say new runnable, and of course I'm doing capital R, UN, and then I'm hitting enter. And what that's going to do is going to generate my nice little anonymous inner class for me. And then I'm going to go ahead and terminate the line. We won't fill in the run method again. We are doing a quick stub out of everything and talking about at a high level how this is going to work. Now, the run method, the search runnable is what's going to be responsible for actually performing the search. And that's how we're going to be combining the search runnable with the handler in order to create our sort of queued / delayed search behavior that I was talking about a second ago. Okay, so now that we have that, we of course are going to need our create method. Then I'm going to create a subscribe. By the way, I put the autocomplete was messing up for a second, so I put my keyboard cursor after that B and I hit Alt space and enter because I need this class to be imported before I can use the annotation. And then I'm going to say public void on users searched. And of course, not surprisingly, it's going to take in a contacts dot, which I'm going to hit Alt-Enter to import Buzz Euroservices contacts dot search users response. So that method, of course, will be invoked when the server returns the list of users. And I am going to go ahead and need some sort of, or I'm going to need this activity to implement the on item clicked. So you know how we're going to have a list view. Well, we need to implement the on item clicked so we can handle what happens when a user gets clicked. So all the way back at the top of the class, I'm going to say implements on item click listener. And I'm going to make sure the one that I'm grabbing here is from the Android widget adapter view, because that's where the interface comes from. I'm going to hit enter, and then I'm going to hit Alt enter enter enter, so that the on item clicked method appears there at the bottom. So now we have our on item clicked method. And then I'm going to go ahead and create kind of a helper method called private void send friend request. That's going to take in a user details user, or it's not going to be send friend request, it's going to be send contact request. And the last thing we need to do for this particular class is going to be writing another subscribe that's going to be a public void on friend request sent. And it's going to take in a... and I said friend again, didn't I? Oops. On contact request sent. And it's going to take in a contacts dot... where are you? Send contact request response. So you guys remember a while ago we made the send contact request and the send contact request response. We're going to go ahead and implement that there too. Okay, so those are our methods. Again, pretty straightforward class here. So let's go all the way back up to the top and start off by implementing on our on Euro create method. So the first thing I want to do is I want to instantiate my adapter. So I'm going to say adapter equals new user details adapter, passing in this for the base activity. Then I want to get my list view. So I'm going to say list view equals cast to list view, not list, find view by ID, r.id, activity add contact. Oops, I forgot to create the user's list view. So we're going to do users list view. We're going to pretend that this ID exists for a second, and then after we're done with this method, we'll throw this ID on top of the appropriate view there. And I'm going to say list view dot set on item click listener this, and list view dot set adapter adapter. Pretty straightforward stuff. Just normal list view things. Now for our progress frame, we're going to say find view by ID r.id progress frame. In this case, we want activity add contact progress frame. And then what we want to do is I want to go ahead and say progress frame.set visibility view gone. We want to make it disappear when we start up this activity because we're not yet searching anything yet, so I want to make sure it's invisible here. Then let's go ahead and instantiate our handler. So I'm going to say handler equals new handler. And I'm going to say search view equals new search view, passing in this as the context. So just instantiating a couple of our fields. We need our handler again so that we can deal with our sort of delayed API request sort of thing. And we need our search view because that's what's going to appear in our toolbar as that cool little edit text. Then what we're going to do is we're going to get a reference to our action bar. Now, this seems a little weird. We're getting a reference to our action bar despite the fact I keep on saying we're doing this to our toolbar. But in reality, we are going to remember how we set our toolbar to act as our action bar. So what's going on under the hood right here is the toolbar. There's a little proxy class that gets set up between the action bar API and the toolbar API. And in order to set the custom view, we have to access this through the action bar API. So that's why I'm getting the action bar. But in reality, this variable is actually our toolbar, or rather it's some sort of adapter class between the action bar and the toolbar API. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say action bar.setDisplayOptions, set display options, and we're going to say action bar.display show custom. So if you recall, our action bar has these different display options, and they show and hide different things. What I'm doing here is I'm hiding the title. I'm removing the title. It doesn't matter what the title of the action bar is of the toolbar, it's going to be hidden. And I'm showing the custom view that we're about to add to it. So next up, let's go ahead and, let's do just that. Action bar.set custom view search view. Then let's go ahead and I'm going to say toolbar.set iconified, search view.set iconified is false. So what's iconified? Well, basically custom views that can be added to your action bar can be shown and hidden. And when they're iconified, they get turned into an action bar item that just appears like any other icon would, any other action on your action bar. But when you set iconified to false, what it's doing there is it's being turned into its actual full view. Next up, I'm going to do something interesting here. I'm going to say search view.set layout params, and I'm going to instantiate new toolbar.layout params, of course using the support toolbar, which is right here. And then I'm going to pass in action bar or toolbar.layout params.match parent toolbar.layout params.match parent, and that's math math parent match parent, and that'll be that. So what I'm doing here is I'm overriding the layout parameters of the search view. Now if you recall, a search view, if I just control click on the search view, you can actually decompile it and we can see the inheritance hierarchy. You see how it is eventually going to be a view group in this case. And a view group, of course, inherits from view. So with these custom views that you add to your adapter or your action bar, you can override their layout parameters just like you would overwrite your layout parameters in any other view in your layout. All right, so now that I've done that, let's go ahead and say search view. And this I'm not going to quite implement just yet. I'm going to put together two little things here that I'm not going to implement, but before we test this. But I do want to point them out because they're important. We're going to say set onQuery text listener, new onQuery text listener. Now this method right here, this callback that we're creating, has two methods, and they're used for, well, as you can see, they're callbacks for when the user types things in and when he submits So when he hits the enter button or the done button. And the last thing I'm going to stub out here is I'm going to say search view dot set on close listener, new on close listener. Now the on close listener, this happens, remember how I said the search view can be expanded and collapsed, so it can be iconified or not? This listener, what it does is it listens for when the user disables the search view and iconifies it or collapses it back into its component. Anyway, we do have an error here. We have not created this layout ID. So go ahead and I guess pause the video if you're still typing. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the include toolbar, or whoops, the activity add contact.xml file. I'm going to locate the list view, and I'm going to give it an ID of activity add contact users list view. And that'll make our code compile. So now let's go ahead and just take a look at what we've done so far. So I'm going to right-click Add Contacts Activity, and I'm going to say Run Add Contact Activity. So that'll allow me to execute this activity without going through the rest of the application first, which is really cool. Now let's go ahead and say Use Same Device for future launches. And you see that there, and we get an exception. That's not good. Blah, blah, blah. It really doesn't like that being null. Let's see here. What I believe could be happening here could be due to the fact that on this include, I gave it a different ID. I gave it an ID so that I can reference it within this layout file. I gave it the ID of activity add contact toolbar so I can reference it in this layout below. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to change the ID to be the exact same as what it would have been through this include, which is going to be include underscore toolbar. So I'm going to change this ID to include underscore toolbar, and then of course I'm going to change the equivalent layout below. And I do believe that's going to be the problem, and if this was the problem, I'll show you guys exactly what part of the code caused it. Let's go ahead and hit run, because I'm pretty sure that was the problem. Yep, that was the problem. Okay, so what was going on here is we have our include, and it's bringing in this guy, which has an ID, which is totally cool because when this guy has this particular ID, we're able to retrieve this view by saying find view by ID, because it's added to the view hierarchy. However, in this case, I need to also specify the ID inside of this layout. And when I specify the ID inside this layout and it differs from the ID that we're expecting it to, then this line of code, all the way in our base activity, right here, our set content view. Remember our set content view that we overrode? Where we find the toolbar by ID and then we set it as a support action bar? Well, this is finding it by a very particular ID, and if it's not that ID, then it's not going to work. And what's going on here is if we set this ID inside of this layout file, this ID is going to override the ID in the layout. So that's why it broke. And it was a simple solution, simply change the ID of our include back to our, or the ID right here back to what it was inside of the include file. All right, so if I come here, check that out. We now have a search view, and I can close it, and it becomes iconified, but that doesn't really matter because we are going to overwrite this code and have it finish this activity if they hit the close button there. Okay, so what I want to do real fast is I want to show you guys a quick example of how we can change this toolbar color to something a little bit lighter or a little bit different, and we're going to do this on a per activity basis. And the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to create a custom theme for just this activity. And I think this is a cool way to show off how you can create custom themes on a per activity basis, because we really haven't done that yet in this series. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to close out everything, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my res values styles.xml file, and then underneath my app theme, I'm going to say style name equals add contact theme parent equals app theme. And then inside of this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say item name color primary, and I'm going to give it a value. In this case, I'm going to give it a very light brown. I'll give it a value of D7CCC8. Okay, so now I've created a new theme in my application, and what I want to show you guys now is how we can very easily go inside of our manifest. So I'm going to open up my manifest, select Android manifest.xml. I'm going to locate the add contact activity. So this is the activity node underneath our application node. And I'm simply going to add a new attribute to it. I'm going to say theme equals add, or whoops, it's going to be at style add contact theme. Now if we hit play, we should have our primary color changed. So that's a really quick way to show you guys how we can change styles on a per activity basis. It comes in handy quite often, or it can anyway, if you want to do custom designs on stuff. Anyway, point is now we have a lighter background, and our darker search widget now looks a little bit more appropriate. Okay, let's go ahead and I did actually let's go ahead and finish our on Euro create, because we still have our text listeners to do, and I also missed one small little thing here, and that is after we say search view.set layout params, or how about after we do set iconified, because the code will look a little nicer if I do it up here. I'm going to say search view.set query hint, and I'm going to say search for users. And what that'll do is that'll display a nice little search for users hint on the back of the search view. Okay, so for the onQuery text submit, I'm simply going to return true. I'm not going to do anything else there. For the onQuery text change, now this method is invoked whenever the user types something into the search view. So what I'm going to do here is I'm first going to rename this parameter to query, just so the code is a little nicer looking. Then I'm going to say, if query.length is smaller than 3, return true. So if they haven't yet typed in 3 characters, I don't really care enough to submit this request. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say handler dot remove callbacks, and I'm going to pass in my search runnable. Then I'm going to say handler dot post delayed search runnable. Let's say let's do it in 750 milliseconds, and then let's return true. So what does this do? Well, the first line of code here says, handler, if you have this particular runnable scheduled at any point, go ahead and remove it so it's not invoked, and then reschedule it to happen in 750 milliseconds. So that's how we're going to be implementing the whole wait 750 milliseconds before you submit the API call. Okay, for the set on close listener, this is going to be pretty simple. We're going to say set result canceled, and then finish, and then return true because we handled it. So what's going on here? Well, we're setting our activity result to result canceled, which informs any other activity that started this activity with start activity for result that we canceled the request entirely. And then we just finish ourselves. We finish the activity. We're done. Okay, so before we move on to the rest of the methods, let's go back up to the top and implement our search runnable. So our search runnable, again, is responsible for being invoked when the user pauses for a second after typing in some text. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm first going to say last query equals search view dot get query dot toString. So the get query method returns a char sequence, and we just convert it into a string. And then I'm going to say progress frame dot set visibility view visible, and then I'm going to say bus dot post new contacts dot search users request, passing in this case last query, and that's it. So that's it, making the actual request. I did misspell runnable here in my variable name. Let's go ahead and change that to runnable with 2 N's. And then I'm going to scroll down here to the bottom and change it where I reference it here. You could have also used the refactoring menu to do that. But anyway, that's all we were going to do in there. So let's move on to our on users searched method. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make the progress bar go away, the progress frame. So I'm going to say progress frame set visibility view gone. Then I'm going to say if not response did succeed, or we don't have a did succeed method. That's because I forgot to... Okay, so jump all the way back to, or simply control-click on this parameter. And go ahead and make sure that this inherits from service response. All right, let's jump back to add contacts activity and say, if not response did succeed, then response.showErrorToast this and return. Then I'm going to say, if not response.query.equals last query, then return. Meaning this is a stale query. This code will only execute right here if it's a stale query. If the server responded slowly enough that we made another request and that already got processed, then we'll just discard this response because it's not the last query. We don't care about it. Then I'm going to say adapter.clear and adapter.addAll response.users. Or whoops, yeah. Okay, let's go on to our onItemClick here. Now, for our onItemClick, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I'm going to go ahead and show a dialog. So I'm going to say alert dialog, dialog equals new alert dialog dot builder, and I'm going to pass in this for the context. I'm going to set its positive button to send contact request with a new onClick listener. And the onClick listener will simply say send contact request adapter.getItem position. Of course, when I auto-completed on that position, it got the final modifier as a parameter. So make sure to add that because we need to access it in our closure. And that's all I need to do there. Then I'm going to say set negative button cancel with a null onClick listener. And then I'm going to say create. And then I'm going to say dialog.show. So that'll show a nice little dialog to ask the user if he really wants to send that contact request or if he just maybe accidentally typed or hit somebody. So for the send contact request method, we are going to say selected user equals user. And then we're going to say progress frame.set visibility view visible. And then we're going to say bus.post new contacts.send contact request. And then we're going to pass in for the user ID, user.getID. And that's it there. And then finally, for on contact request sent, I'm going to say if not response did succeed, then response.showErrorToast this. We want to go ahead and make our progress frame invisible. So progress frame.setVisibility view gone. And then I guess I'm going to go ahead and just say return. Now, if the response did succeed, then we're going to have to pass in the user that we got back into the calling activity. So I'm going to say intent equals new intent, and doesn't need to have any context or anything. I'm going to say intent.putExtra, and I'm going to pass in result contact, and we're going to pass in here selected user, which is our field that we populated in the send contact request method. And then I'm going to say set result okay intent, and then say finish. So when our API call is finished for sending the request, we go ahead and finish ourselves, and we set the user that we selected as our additional data that we send back to the activity. So now let's go ahead and hit play and see if this code works, which it's not going to because I just remembered there's a bug in the code. So let's go ahead and let it start up real fast and fix that bug. Now, the bug is actually going to be inside of our in-memory implementation here. So let's open up our in-memory contact service. What I forgot to do is the request that we post, or the response that we post back, I forgot to set its query to what the request's query was. So right here, right after we instantiate our response, I'm going to say response query equals request query. Now I'll go ahead and hit play. Bring this down over here. And then type in something. Notice how nothing's happening right here. But when I get more 3 or more characters, we get that. And check that out. We got 3 contacts. So now if I type in some more stuff, you'll notice I get even more than that. I get 13 contacts. And then I can go ahead and close that out there. And then if we're making the request and I make another request, I should, in this case, only get 4 contacts. And I get for contacts. So you see how that's working right there. If I hit this exit button, notice how the first time I hit the exit button, it clears the query. The second time I hit the exit button, it finishes the activity, which is exactly what I want. So let's start it back up again. The last thing I want to do to test this is just click on a contact. Click on contact 1. Now we get this, cancel or send contact request. I can hit cancel, or I can say send contact request, and if I do, I get my progress frame, and then it finishes. So yeah, an entire add contact screen. You could definitely have a lot of fun with this. You can put together some animations for the progress frame, maybe make the progress frame semi-transparent and all that fun stuff, but you've already seen how to do all that at this point. So really, I just need things functional. And at this point, that form is functional. So I guess, yeah, we'll see you guys in the next video.